Part 1. I want to be clear about one thing before this story takes me apart. On the morning I ended my marriage, I was in a good mood. Not a cruel mood, not even an angry one, just settled. I had thought about it for months. I had weighed it the way I weigh a property deal, line by line, and I had decided. A decided man sleeps well the night before. I slept 9 hours. I should tell you what I believed I was ending, because it is the true measure of how wrong a confident man can be. I thought I was ending 5 years of quiet. Clara and I had become two courteous strangers, sharing a mortgage and a hallway, and I had concluded, the way you conclude that a building is a bad investment, that the quiet meant the thing was empty. I had built a whole tidy theory out of it. The theory let me file paperwork instead of asking my own wife one honest question, which would have been harder, and which I had not done in longer than I am comfortable telling you. I arrived early, too. I called ahead the day before, because I am the kind of man who calls ahead, and I gave my name to a woman on the phone who could not have cared less about it. The courthouse smelled like floor wax and old paper. I walked up to the clerk's counter with my folder squared under my arm, and I gave her my very best, composed adult voice. "Sterling versus Sterling," I said. "I called ahead yesterday." She did not look up from her screen. "Third window, sign on the blue line." That was the reception my life's largest decision received. A blue line, and a woman with 100 better things to do than witness the end of me. I had prepared a list. I want that in the record, because it tells you exactly who I was that morning. I had bullet points, in case the clerk needed context for the dissolution of a 5-year marriage. She did not need context. She processed the form the way a toll booth processes a car. No eye contact, no slowing down, a soft, mechanical beep as the barrier lifts. I kept the list folded in my jacket. It stayed there all day. Nothing on it was ever useful to anyone. "Reason for filing?" she asked, already typing. "Irreconcilable differences," I said. I had a longer version. 3 sentences, actually, measured and fair, generous to Clara even. The clerk did not want the longer version. Nobody that day wanted the longer version. "Sign here. And here." "Initials in the 2 boxes at the bottom," she said, sliding the form back at me and already reaching for the next person's paperwork before I had picked up the pen. I signed. My hand was steady, and I noticed that it was steady, and I was quietly, stupidly proud of it. Look at me, so resolved, so grown, ending a marriage with the poise of a man renewing a lease. Behind me, Matthew held the door. There was no reason to hold the door. It was one of those heavy municipal doors with a slow hydraulic hinge that closes itself if you leave it alone. Matthew held it anyway, and he watched my back the whole time like he was worried I might go over sideways. Matthew Evans had been my best friend for 12 years, my business partner, the best man at my wedding, who gave a toast about loyalty that made 2 tables cry. He drove me to the courthouse that morning and said almost nothing on the way, and I read the silence as respect. I read a great many things wrong that day. "You holding up?" he asked when I turned around with my stamped copy. "I'm great," I said, "and the terrible part is that I meant it." "It's done." "Yeah," Matthew nodded slowly, looking at the folder in my hands instead of at my face. "It's done." He said it the way a man agrees to something he already agreed to somewhere else, in another room, with another person. I did not hear that then. I hear nothing else now. His phone stayed in his jacket pocket the whole time we stood there. Not on the counter, not in his hand, buried in the pocket, screen against his chest, where I could not have seen it light up if it wanted to. I did not think about that. I think about almost nothing else now. "You want to get a drink after?" he said. "Or, I don't know, whatever you want." "I'm fine, Matt, genuinely." I clapped him on the shoulder, the confident one comforting the concerned one, which in hindsight is the funniest arrangement of 2 men that has ever existed. I feel lighter already. The clerk slid my stamped copy across the counter without a word of ceremony. 5 years of a marriage, reduced to a document a stranger stamped without reading, filed somewhere between 2 other endings she would process before her lunch break. "Have a good day," she said, to her screen. "You too," I said. And I remember thinking, honestly, that she had processed more endings before 10 in the morning than I had lived through in my whole life. She carried every one of them with better posture than I was managing for a single one. I walked out. Matthew followed half a beat behind me, the way he always walked, the way I had never once in 12 years thought to question. The heavy door swung shut on its slow hinge behind us, sealing the clerk and her blue line away for good. The signing room was down a short hall, smaller, and that was where Clara was. I need to tell you how I saw my wife that morning, which is to say, barely. Clara. A quiet woman. I used to call her, privately, in the smug little courtroom of my own head, low maintenance. And I was proud of that word. The way a man is proud of a car that never breaks down, that he never once bothers to actually look at. She was already seated when I came in. Her attorney sat beside her, a woman with a flat, unbothered face and a gray blazer, laying out the pages in a neat, precise fan across the table like a dealer setting a hand. Clara did not look up at me either. I was, apparently, going to have a full day of people declining to look up. Page 11, Mrs. Sterling, the attorney said, and page 14, initial the margins where they're flagged. Clara signed page 11. She signed page 14. She initialed the margins. She did not pause on a single line, did not reread a single clause, did not do any of the things a person does when a piece of paper still frightens them. She signed the way you sign for a delivery you have been expecting all week, and were, if anything, a little relieved had finally shown up at the door. I watched her hand move across the paper, and I waited. I am not proud of the waiting. I was standing there waiting for a tremor, a wet eye, a held breath, some small crack that would confirm, out loud, that I had been right about all of it. I got nothing. Her hand was steadier signing away our marriage than mine had been at the blue line. Her face was calm in a way that was almost light. Almost, and I hate this word now, almost relieved. And I told myself that this was my proof. There, see? She never cared. Look how easily she lets it go. A man will invent any story that lets him keep sleeping 9 hours a night. Here is what I would not let myself see, standing 4 feet away in that little room. A woman does not sit that still, that early, unless she has already done all of her moving somewhere you were never invited to watch. Her calm was not the calm of a person losing something. It was the calm of a person who finished losing it a long time ago, quietly, alone, while the man across the table was busy being proud of a theory. I read her stillness as indifference, because indifference was the only reading that let me keep my good posture. The truth had a far worse shape, and I would not have to hold it for months. That completes the required signatures, the attorney said, and swept the fanned pages back into a folder with 2 clean, final taps against the tabletop. Tap, tap. The most decisive sound I would hear for weeks. Clara said exactly one thing in that room. One. She turned, not to me, to the woman in the gray blazer, and she said, "Thank you." Not to me. To her. Attorney. I was standing 4 feet away, her husband for maybe 11 more minutes of legal fiction, and I was not the person my wife chose to thank. I opened my mouth. I still could not tell you what I meant to say. Something adult, something clean and resolved, a closing line worthy of how well I had slept. Whatever it was, it did not arrive, and I closed my mouth again around the empty space where it should have been. Then Clara stood, and she reached down, and she picked up her bag. I noticed the bag because it was already packed. Not a purse, a real bag, full, zipped, sitting upright beside her chair as if it had been waiting in that room before either of us walked into it. You do not bring a packed bag to a signing unless you already know precisely where you are going the moment the pen goes down. I did not put it together. I filed the bag under nothing, in the same drawer as Matthew's hidden pocket and the clerk's posture, and that small, calm, relieved thing sitting on my wife's face. She walked out without looking back at me even once. Her attorney followed, with the folder tucked under one arm. The door did its slow, municipal hinge, and I was left standing alone in a room that had, for 11 more minutes, belonged to 2 people, and now belonged to neither of us, staring at a bare table. "See," I said out loud to the empty room, like an absolute idiot. "That was fine. That was completely fine." I even smiled walking to the elevator. That is the frame I would cut from the film if I could reach in and cut it. The smile. A man smiling to himself in an empty hallway, sure he had just won something. The parking garage was 2 levels down, cold in that particular concrete way, my footsteps landing too loud in all that gray. Matthew had drifted off toward his own car somewhere on the far side. I could see him under the lights, phone finally out and in his hand now, his face lit pale blue by the screen. I was maybe 6 feet from my car door, keys already out, when my phone buzzed once against my chest. A news alert. I almost did not look. I nearly let it sit. Then the little thumbnail on the banner resolved into a face I knew better than my own, and my brain took a full, stupid second to work out why a national news alert would be carrying a photograph of my wife. I read the first line once. The words went in and found nothing to hold on to and slid back out. So I read it again, slower, the way you reread a doctor's sentence. Caldwell Capital. Sole beneficiary. Named acting chair, effective immediately. And at the end of the line, a number carrying more zeros than I had ever personally been trusted to be responsible for in my life. The word was right there in the headline, plain, set in the confident font they save for the stories that matter. Trillion. Her grandfather, Caldwell. I had met the old man exactly twice, at 2 joyless family dinners, and I had spent both of them answering email under the table because I had decided, years ago, that the Ashworths were not important. My legs did a thing I have no cleaner word for. They resigned. Not a dramatic buckle, nothing so cinematic, they simply, quietly stopped agreeing to the job of holding me upright. Instead of the car door, I found myself sitting on the cold hood of my own car, phone gripped in both hands, reading the same 3 lines for a third time, as if the third pass would change the number. Across the level, I registered it in the corner of my eye. Matthew's phone had buzzed at the exact same instant mine had. I watched him look down at his screen. Then I watched him look up, across all that concrete, straight at me. He said my name. Adam. I did not answer. I could not, at that moment, have reliably told you my own name. Adam, hey, I just heard. A different voice, closer, warm, and Lawrence Thorne came down the ramp from the level above, at an unhurried, gracious pace, coat perfect, hand already extended, like a man arriving exactly on his cue. Lawrence, my mentor of 11 years, the man who had never once in all that time been early to comfort me about anything, and who was now, impossibly, already in the garage, already reaching for me. Come on, Lawrence said, warm as a fireplace, hand still out. Don't sit there. Let me buy you a coffee. I looked at the hand. I looked back down at the number on my phone. I did the only math I could still manage, which was small and mean and clear. That very morning, in a procedure I had personally organized and written talking points for, I had divorced the single richest woman in the country. And here was a man, already in the garage, coffee on offer, before I had even finished reading the alert a third time. There is a specific kind of person who arrives with coffee that fast. I was going to spend the next stretch of my life learning exactly which kind that is. You didn't know, Lawrence said gently, reading my face. It was not a question. Looking back, it is the most important thing anyone said to me all day, and I missed it completely. God, you really didn't know. Know what? I said. My voice came out flat and far away, someone else's voice, borrowed. Know what, Lawrence? Come have a coffee. He crouched a little, so we were closer to level, the way you talk to someone on a ledge. We'll sort it out. Whatever this is, we'll sort it out together. That's what I'm here for. I took his hand eventually. I did not stand up. My legs and I were still deep in negotiations, and neither side was ready to sign. Behind Lawrence, Matthew had not moved an inch. He was still standing by his car under the lights, still holding his phone, its glow on his face. He watched the two of us like a man at the very edge of a decision he had, if I had only known it, already made and already signed his name to. His engine, I would learn much later, ran for 2 full minutes before he finally pulled out of that garage. 2 minutes of a man sitting still in a running car, going nowhere, deciding nothing, because there was nothing left to decide. Great, I heard myself say, to no one, to the concrete, to the calm, relieved face I could still see if I closed my eyes, to the number burning on the screen. This is fine. This is completely fine. Part 2. I did not drink the coffee. I told Lawrence I needed a minute, and he squeezed my shoulder and said, "Take all the time you need," and I got up off the hood of my car on legs that had grudgingly agreed to come back to work. Then I did the thing a smarter, calmer man would not have done that morning. I got up, and I went looking through a courthouse for the woman I had just spent an hour formally letting go of. The courthouse has a north entrance, a quiet one, tucked around the side, the kind of door lawyers use so their clients never have to walk past a camera. I did not know that door existed this morning. I was learning the whole building in reverse now, one closed exit and one quiet locked door at a time. And every one of them had been decided on before I arrived. "Excuse me," I caught a staff member near the doors, a tired man with a lanyard and a clipboard. "I'm looking for my Mick, for Clara Caldwell. She was in the signing rooms 20 minutes ago." He glanced at the clipboard he did not actually need to consult. "She left already, about 10 minutes ago, through the north entrance." 10 minutes. A separate exit, a separate route out of the same building, arranged in advance, so that the two of us who had shared an address for 5 years would not accidentally share a hallway. "Right," I said, to a tired man who had already turned his attention back down to his clipboard. "Of course she did. Thank you." I stepped outside anyway, into a flat gray morning, and I stood at the wrong door in the exact spot I probably should have been standing for the last 5 years of my life. Then I took out my phone and I called my wife. I knew her voicemail the way you know a song you never chose to memorize. Her real voice, a little flat, faintly embarrassed to be recorded at all. "Hi, it's Clara, leave a message." I had heard it 100 times over 5 years, and I had never once actually listened to it. That is not what picked up. "You have reached the office of Ms. Caldwell. Please leave a message and we will return your call." A woman's voice, not Clara's. Smooth, trained, faintly corporate, the vocal equivalent of a marble floor. The office of Ms. Caldwell. My wife owned a laptop she balanced on the kitchen table, and a favorite mug with a chip in the handle. She did not have an office. She had an office now. I hung up without a sound. I stood on the pavement, and I looked at the phone like it had personally lied to me. Then, I called a second time. I wanted on the record that it was the second time and the last time, because I made myself a small, brittle promise standing at that door, and it was the only promise I managed to keep all week. The same trained, pleasant voice answered on the second ring, with the same clean, corporate promise. The same, "We will return your call." I stood at that wrong door far longer than a dignified man would have. Long enough that the tired staffer with the clipboard came back out, saw me still standing there, and asked, not unkindly, whether I needed him to call someone for me. I told him no, there was no one to call. That, more or less, was the entire finding of the morning. A thorough, building-wide audit that returned a single clean result. There was no one, anywhere in that structure, whose job it was to help me reach my own wife, because she had made very sure of that before I ever woke up feeling so resolved. I would have very much liked to speak with one of the we. I would have liked to shake the hand of whoever the we was that now stood, politely, between a man and the wife whose exact serial preference he could recite in his sleep. There was, of course, no one to shake hands with. There was a recording, and a wrong door, and me. I did not leave a message. There was no message. What was I going to say to a machine that would forward it to a committee? The joke of it, the part that actually landed, was that I could have left her a message on that phone any night for the last 5 years, and I never did. I had a direct line to Clara for 1,800 days, and I used it to ask her to pick up milk. Now the line had a receptionist, and I finally had something to say. My phone buzzed in my hand before I could put it back in my pocket. Matthew. "Hey." He said it too gently, the voice you use on a man in a hospital bed. "You okay?" Obviously I saw it. Everybody saw it. "I'm at the courthouse," I said. "She already left." Yeah, she... Look, she had a lot to sort out. There were arrangements. You know how these things are. An estate that size, it doesn't just happen by itself. There's a whole... Matt. I cut across him, and my voice came out very quiet, quieter than I meant it to. "Did you know her grandfather was sick?" There was a pause on the line, a small one, small enough that I would have missed it any other day of the last 12 years. But I was, for the first time, actually listening to Matthew Evans, and I heard the whole shape of it. "Everyone knew he wasn't well," Matthew said, a half-second too fast. "I mean, the man was ancient. It was hardly a state secret that he was... Look, nobody actually thought it was." I hung up. I did not decide to hang up. My thumb decided, somewhere below the level of thought. I stood at the wrong door, holding a phone that had, in the space of 4 minutes, stopped being a line to my wife and turned into a line to her organization, and to a friend who could not finish a single sentence. I put the phone away. I walked to my car. I drove to my office, because when a man's personal life detonates in a parking garage, the deep male instinct is to go somewhere, anywhere, that he is still permitted to feel competent. I did not feel competent. But the lot outside my building had one comfort waiting in it. And by comfort, I mean Lawrence Thorne, leaning against a black car like he had grown up out of the asphalt. Lawrence was in the parking lot. Lawrence is always in the parking lot. I have 43 saved contacts for real estate attorneys and 2 for restaurants I no longer go to. I also have exactly 1 mentor. He has attended every professional catastrophe of my adult life like it was a standing appointment on his calendar. It had genuinely, in 11 years, never once occurred to me to ask why. There he is. Lawrence pushed off the car, warm as a heat lamp. "I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd check on you." "You're always in the neighborhood, Lawrence." He laughed like I had said something charming instead of something true. "I've been thinking about your situation. There's something you ought to consider. Only you can decide it, but you should at least have it in front of you." "I'm listening." I was not, particularly, but listening cost nothing, and remaining upright was still a fresh personal achievement I did not want to jeopardize. "Here's what I'd do in your position. And there it was, in your position. He had said those exact 4 words to me 6 times in the last 12 months, and every single time the advice that followed had walked me, gently, by the elbow, to precisely the spot Lawrence needed me to be standing. I had only, right there in the parking lot, finished counting to 6. The settlement terms are still inside a window, he went on, spreading his hands like a man offering me a gift. If the inheritance transfer created a material change in the marital estate, and it did, obviously it did, then you have standing. You have room to contest it. You want me to contest the divorce settlement? I said. 3 days after I filed it. Not as an attack, God no, as due diligence. You'd be a fool not to at least look at the numbers. Warm, reasonable, generous. You gave that marriage 5 years, Adam. Nobody alive would fault you for making sure the paperwork reflects what you're owed. I looked at him. Somewhere far under the shock, a small, dry voice in me observed that any paperwork honestly reflecting my marriage would be a single blank page, and that I was owed roughly what I had put in. I did not say that. What I actually said, out loud, standing in my own parking lot in the flat daylight, was 4 small words. I'll think about it. And here's the strange part. That was the first time in 11 years I had not simply agreed with Lawrence Thorne about something. 4 words. I'll think about it. For about 1 full second, I was genuinely, warmly proud of myself. Then I noticed that being proud of a 4-word sentence was, at this exact moment, the entire ceiling of my life's achievements, and the pride went out like a struck match in a draft. And underneath the small dead pride, something else had started, very quietly, the way a draft finds a room a while before you notice the window is even open. I did not have a name for it yet. I would not have one for weeks. But some cold, patient, professional part of me, the part that can read a building and know in 90 seconds whether the foundation under it is sound, had begun, for the first time in 11 years, to turn itself slowly toward Lawrence Thorne. And it did not much like the numbers it was getting back. Of course, Lawrence said, smiling, plainly hearing a yes where I had very deliberately said a maybe. Take all the time you need. I'm only saying, a window like this one doesn't stay open forever. He patted my shoulder, told me to call him day or night, and watched me walk into my building. And then, though I did not see it, and would only understand it much later, he took out his phone and called Matthew. Matthew, at that moment, was sitting in his own car 3 miles away with the engine running, and the car not going anywhere. He had been sitting like that for 2 minutes. He had begun a text to me. I should probably tell you. He had looked at it for a while, and then he had deleted it, 1 letter at a time, until the box was empty and clean and said nothing at all. Then his phone had lit up with Lawrence's name across the top, and he had answered it, and after that he had put the car in gear and driven. I did not know any of that yet. I only knew that everyone in my life suddenly had somewhere important to be, and that every one of those places involved me and did not include me. The next morning, I tried the last door I could think of. Clara's attorney worked out of a firm downtown, all glass and gray stone, the kind of lobby engineered to make you feel your problem is being handled thoroughly, competently, somewhere on a floor you are not allowed to visit. Good morning. I gave the receptionist my best, composed adult voice, the same one that had done me so much good at the courthouse. My name is Adam Sterling. I'd like to speak with the attorney handling Clara Caldwell's affairs. She smiled at me. It was a real smile, warm and practiced, and that was somehow the worst part of the whole building. All communication regarding the Caldwell estate is directed through these channels, Mr. Sterling. She slid a slim folder across the counter toward me, unhurried, like she had printed it that morning, knowing I would come. Miss Caldwell has retained outside counsel for the proceedings. Everything you'll need is in there. The Caldwell estate. Not the divorce. Not Clara. The Caldwell estate. The phrase landing in the marble air like the name of a small country I did not hold a visa for. I just need 5 minutes, I said. With her or with the attorney, that's all, please. Of course. There's a contact form inside and a response window of 72 hours. Still smiling, still genuinely kind, completely, perfectly immovable, a wall that pulls out a chair for you and offers you water while you fail to get through it. I took the folder. I want that on the record, too. I took it. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not say the true and useless thing out loud, which was that I knew this woman's childhood dog's name, her mother's maiden name, and precisely how she took her coffee on a bad morning versus a good one. And I was being handed a form with a 72-hour response window in order to reach her. I knew everything about Clara that did not matter, and, it was turning out, nothing whatsoever that did. I opened the folder right there at the counter, because I am constitutionally incapable of not reading a document that is handed to me. A cover sheet, a submission portal address, a reference number for a case that was, apparently, me. My whole marriage ending had been assigned a tracking number, and the tracking number had been formatted with more care than any anniversary card I had managed in 5 years of trying. And then, across the lobby, a woman I half recognized crossed from one hallway to another. Gray blazer, the flat, unbothered face from the signing room the day before, Clara's attorney. She looked at me, one look, a single unhurried pass, the way you glance at a chair to decide whether it will hold your weight, and she did not stop, and she did not slow down, and she did not introduce herself. She had been watching me at family dinners for 5 years. She had cataloged the exact angle at which I checked my phone under the table while Clara's grandfather told a story. She knew who I was and what I did not understand about myself, and she filed me completely in the half second it took to cross a lobby floor, and then she was gone through a door I was not permitted to open. I stood there holding my folder of official channels, and I looked at the door she had disappeared through for a moment too long, the way you look at a train you have just watched leave. Then I left. In the car, I set the folder on the passenger seat and my phone in the cup holder, and for the first time in 2 days, I did not reach for the phone. There was no one on the other end of it. There had not been, if I was honest, for quite a long time. I simply had not been listening. I drove. Part 3. Lawrence did not wait for me to call him about the settlement. He arranged a lunch. Which is to say, he had his assistant arrange a lunch, which is to say, a meeting simply appeared in my calendar with his name on it. And I went. Going where Lawrence put me was a reflex I had spent 11 years building, and 3 days was not enough to break it. We met in a conference room I technically controlled, in my own building, which should have told me something and did not. He came in warm, unhurried, a leather folio under one arm, and he sat like a man who had all afternoon and no particular agenda. "How are you sleeping?" he asked. "Badly," I said. "Thank you for asking." "Good, that's honest. I'd worry if you told me you were sleeping fine." He set the folio down on the table and did not open it. In 11 years, I had never once seen Lawrence bring a prop he actually needed. The folio was there to be a folio, to make this a meeting instead of an ambush. "Here's what I'd do in your position." There it was again. In your position. I had started keeping a private count, the way you count a tick in someone you love, and this was, I believe, the 7th time in a week. "The inheritance transfer created a material change in the marital estate," Lawrence went on, spacious and calm. "That is not an opinion. That is a fact with a filing number, which means you have legal standing to contest the settlement terms." Real standing, not sentiment, standing. "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" I said. I watched him register the question, cool, procedural, a business question, and I watched it please him, because a man asking about timelines is a man who has already decided in his heart and is only negotiating with the calendar. 3 to 4 weeks to file, he said. The filing triggers an automatic pause on the transfer while it's adjudicated. That pause is the leverage. Everything moves while the other side would much rather it froze. I let that sit for a moment. "And on her side," I said, "the pause, what does it do to her?" Something crossed Lawrence's face then, very small, very fast, gone almost before it arrived. "It protects your interest," he said. "That's the only side of this that's your business, Adam." It was the first time all lunch he had answered a question by telling me it was not my question. I filed that too. "And you think this is the right move?" I said. "I think it is the necessary move." He said it gently, like a doctor. "Sentiment is not a legal strategy. I've been in these rooms for 30 years. The window is now. In a month it is gone, and you will have left something on the table that was yours." These rooms. 30 years. I noticed he did not say, "I have experience." He said, "I've been in these rooms." As if the rooms themselves were the qualification. As if proximity were a kind of ownership. I briefly considered asking him which rooms. Then I noticed that briefly considering things was where my entire better judgment currently lived, in a small apartment above a shop, paying rent. He answered the 2 questions I asked, both precise, both procedural, neither of them emotional. He answered them the way you answer a client you already have. Smooth, complete, no hesitation anywhere. Then he did the thing that nearly worked. He leaned in, and his voice dropped, and the warmth got quieter and more personal. "I know how this looks," he said. "You just signed the papers. The last thing on earth you want is to reopen any of it. But I'm not asking you to reopen a marriage, Adam. That is done. I'm asking you to close a transaction properly. Those are 2 completely different things." He let it land. "Separate the feeling from the deal. You taught me that, actually. You said it to me years ago, and I never forgot it. And there it was, the masterstroke. He had taken a thing I genuinely believed, a thing I had said to him once feeling clever, and he handed it back to me as permission to do the exact thing he needed me to do. He was quoting me to myself, against myself, in my own voice, using my own words. I have to tell you, as a professional who has run a fair number of rooms in his time, that it was genuinely beautiful work. And the whole time, underneath all of it, one small, stubborn thing sat in the back of my mind and would not leave. A pause that would freeze the Caldwell transfer. That was the leverage he kept naming, over and over. Not what I would gain, what I would freeze. I did not yet know what to do with it, so I filed it next to the packed bag and Matthew's hidden pocket. I'll let you know, I said, and I stood up. Lawrence did not move to stop me. He did not push. He smiled, warm as ever. Of course, you know where I am. That was the correct thing to say, and he said it perfectly. I walked out. I did not see this next part, but I know Lawrence the way you know a song, and I would bet the whole building we stood in on it. His smile held for about 2 seconds after the door closed. Then he picked up his phone, before my footsteps had even faded from the corridor. A man who is offering advice can afford to wait. A man who is running a schedule cannot. Here is the other thing I did not see, and only assembled later, once I finally understood what I was looking at. The day before my lunch, Lawrence had a lunch of his own, with Matthew. I was not there. But I have watched Lawrence run a table 47 times, and I know exactly how it went. Lawrence ordered the salmon. Lawrence always orders the salmon. I have had lunch with that man 47 times, and he has ordered the salmon 47 times. I have eaten salmon twice in my life, both times across from Lawrence, and I still could not tell you whether I like it. I have never once had the opportunity to find out. He would not have looked at the menu. It is his table, his regular table, and the waiter knows. Matthew would have ordered whatever came second on the list, because Matthew orders nervously, and he would have eaten almost none of it, because a man does not have an appetite while he is being managed and calling it lunch. Lawrence would have folded his hands and asked how I was doing, and he would have meant it, in the specific way Lawrence means things, with total attention and no warmth at all beneath the warmth. How is he? Lawrence would have asked. And Matthew, I know Matthew too, Matthew would have over-answered. He's processing. You know Adam, he doesn't show it, but it's a lot, obviously. It's a lot for anybody. And he's not the type to just... Does he have the filing document? Lawrence would have asked, setting down his fork with no particular urgency. I think so, yeah, I think he does, Matthew would have answered, a half beat too fast. Good, the window moves fast. And here Lawrence would have said the thing I did not hear and would have given a year of my life to hear. You understand our arrangement covers this phase. Our arrangement. 2 words, dropped on a table between the bread and the salmon, requiring no elaboration and receiving none. Matthew would not have asked, what arrangement? You do not ask a man to explain an arrangement you have already signed your name to. Yes, Matthew would have said. Good. And the warmth would not have changed, not once. Because for Lawrence, the warmth is not a mask he takes off. It is the same face he wears helping you, and the face he wears ending you. That is the whole horror of the man. You cannot tell which one is happening, because from the outside, they are identical. Matthew laughed at something Lawrence said. A beat too late. I know it was a beat too late because Matthew always laughs a beat too late when he is afraid. And Lawrence, who misses nothing, would have filed that too. He files everyone. He was filing Matthew across that table exactly the way he had been filing me for 11 years. And Matthew read the attention as friendship, which is the precise mistake I had been making my entire adult life. I want to be fair to Matthew here, as fair as I can still manage, because it is easy to make him the villain, and he was not quite that. Matthew was afraid. He had a wife and a daughter and a mortgage and a decade of watching me get offered corner offices he never was. And when my star began to dim, he did the cold arithmetic that frightened men do. He did not hate me. He simply valued his own safety more than he valued me, and told himself, the way we all tell ourselves, that the two things had never once been in conflict. They had been in conflict for years. He just needed them not to be. When the lunch ended, Lawrence wiped his mouth, set his napkin down, and said, "He'll make the right call." Then he left. And Matthew sat at the table alone for a moment with a mostly full plate. He took out his phone. He started a text to me. I should probably tell you. And he looked at it for a while, and then he held the delete key until it was gone. And he told himself he would tell me later. After the settlement thing settled. He told his wife that night that he was worried about me. I believe that part was even true. Matthew has always been able to hold a real feeling and a quiet betrayal in the same hand and never notice they are touching. His wife, from what I understand, did not say anything back. She just looked at him a moment too long, the way you look at a man explaining something you never asked about, and then she went back to the dishes. Matthew took that for absolution. It was not absolution. It was a woman deciding not to have the conversation yet. That same week, though I would not learn it for months, Clara's attorney was standing at her own front desk when her assistant mentioned, in passing, that the Sterling man had called twice and come by once. She did not look up from what she was reading. "Note it," she said. Then she sat down, opened a folder with no label I would ever be allowed to see, looked at something inside it for a moment, and closed it again. She had been quietly deciding what I was for 5 years. She was not finished deciding. But she was, it turned out, very close. 2 days later, I saw the profile piece. It came the way these things come now, a link forwarded by someone being helpful, subject line just Lawrence's name and a little smile. An industry magazine. A glossy, admiring feature. Lawrence Thorne, pioneering developer. The visionary who saw value where the market saw nothing. I read it once, all the way through, in my office with the door shut. Then I set the phone down. Then I picked it up and read one paragraph again. The paragraph described in loving detail a concept for repositioning undervalued mixed-use sites that Lawrence had, according to the magazine, personally pioneered. I recognized it because I had presented that exact concept with that exact framing at an industry panel in the second year Lawrence and I worked together. Lawrence had been sitting in the third row. Afterward, he had told me it was clever and that I should be careful who I said it in front of. The piece had optimized the idea beautifully, sanded off the origin, kept the shape, lost the fingerprints. And it mentioned me exactly once, near the bottom, as an example of a younger developer who had benefited from Lawrence's mentorship over the years. That part, I will admit, was technically accurate. I had benefited from Lawrence's mentorship over the years, just not, it was turning out, in the direction the sentence implied. And I laughed. Out loud, alone, in a small office, for the first time in 3 days. Not a happy laugh. The other kind. The one that arrives when a thing is so precise, so professionally cruel, that the only sane response left in the room is admiration. He knew I could read it. He published it anyway. He was that sure, that comfortable, that completely certain I would never again be standing anywhere I could answer it from. And here is the part I could not say out loud, because there was no one left to say it to. He was probably right. That was the real genius of it, not the theft. The theft was ordinary. The genius was the timing. He erased me in print in the exact week I had made myself uncredible by divorcing the richest woman in the country on the evening news. Who was going to believe the broke, freshly humiliated ex-husband claiming the great Lawrence Thorne had stolen his idea? Nobody. I would not have believed me either. I set the phone face down on the desk. I opened my laptop and I started working, because I still had a business, barely, and it was the one room in my life that had not yet locked its door on me. The laugh was gone as fast as it came. But something had turned over inside it and would not turn back. Somewhere between a fish I had never chosen to eat and a magazine handing me my own idea with another man's name on it, a small, cold, patient question had finished forming. Who called whom to set up that first lunch? I had gone over it 6 times, and I genuinely could not reconstruct the sequence. And I was beginning to understand that not being able to was, all by itself, the answer. Part 4. There is an annual gala the industry throws for itself. A big glass and chandelier affair where developers and investors and the people who lend them money all pretend for one evening that they like each other. I had been to it 6 times. 6 times I had walked in through the front, shaken the right hands, and left knowing exactly where I stood. The 7th time, I stood at a registration desk while a very polite young woman looked up my name and handed me a lanyard. It was the wrong color. I knew it was the wrong color before it was all the way out of her hand. I had registered for this gala 4 months earlier, back when I was still a man with a marriage and a pipeline and a table near the middle of the room. The registration system had, it turned out, kept better track of my life than I had. By the time the evening actually arrived, the version of me it had on file no longer existed, and the lanyard was the system's polite way of telling me so. Let me explain the lanyards, because this is an industry that says everything it means with a lanyard and nothing it means with its mouth. Board tier is a deep burgundy. Executive is navy. Investor circle is a kind of pale gold that catches the light. And vendors, the caterers, the software people, the man who used to be a peer and is now here to network from the edges, vendors get gray. I got gray. I want to be clear that this was not an error. I checked. I did not misread the registration. I have attended this event 6 times, and I know the color system the way I know my own signature, and the color system had looked at my current life and rendered its verdict in polyester, and the verdict was gray. I put it on. It was, I decided, the single most honest document I had held all week. A caterer found me near the coat check and asked, very politely, whether I was with the beverage team. I told him no. He apologized and moved on with his tray, and I stood there realizing he had not been rude, and he had not been wrong. He had read the exact same gray lanyard I was reading, and drawn the exact same correct conclusion from it. In a room that codes everything by color, I had been coded correctly, and a stranger holding a tray had understood my current position in the industry a good deal faster than I had managed to in 3 days of trying. Inside, the room was already full and already loud, and then the lights came up on the stage, and a voice I did not know said a name I knew better than any name on earth. Please welcome the new chair of Caldwell Capital, Clara Caldwell. And the room turned. I need you to understand what that turn was, because it was the whole thing. It was not applause, though there was applause. It was a physical reorientation of the entire room. 300 people pivoting their bodies and their attention toward the stage like iron filings when you finally bring the magnet close. And every single person in that turn was a person who used to turn toward me. Not all the way toward me, I was never the magnet, but toward me, at the edges, the way you keep a useful man in your peripheral vision. Now, all at once, they were facing the front of the room. Now they were facing her, and only her. Clara stood at a podium with her own name on a banner 12 feet tall behind her, and she looked calm, and she looked competent, and she looked like she had been doing this her whole life instead of for 11 days. She thanked the room. She said something brief and gracious about recent investment activity in the infrastructure sector. I did not, at the time, hear that line as anything but noise. I would understand it much later, and much too late. When she finished, she stepped down from the stage and the room folded around her. Not a crowd exactly, more a receiving line that assembled itself out of nothing, the way water finds the lowest point in a floor. People I had personally introduced her to at dinners, people who had shaken her hand while looking over her shoulder to see if I had noticed them being gracious, were now angling for 30 seconds of her attention. She gave each of them exactly 30 seconds. Not a moment more, not a moment less. Warm and total, and then finished. I had taught myself that particular trick years ago, the clean, 30-second grace that keeps a room moving. I had just never once had the experience of watching it done, from the outside, by someone who no longer needed anything from me at all. She did not look for me in the crowd. I want that on the record. She did not scan the room to see if I was there, did not find me by the east wall in my gray lanyard, did not give me the small, cruel gift of being noticed. She simply did her job in front of 300 people, and I was one of the 300, and that was the entire transaction. I stayed by the east wall. This is the part I am, in a strange way, proud of. Every instinct I had built across 20 years of this room was screaming at me to cross the floor, to find an angle, to work my way toward the front the way I always had. I did not cross the floor. I read my badge instead. Gray, correct, this is where you are. And I stayed where I was. A man I had closed 2 deals with in better years drifted past me toward the front, close enough that I could have touched his sleeve. He looked at me. I watched it happen on his face. Recognition, then a fast, quiet calculation, then the small, polite nothing you hand to a face you have decided is no longer load-bearing. He did not stop. 6 months ago, he would have stopped. 6 months ago, I was a man worth stopping for. I watched him go, and I did not chase him down the way the old me would have. And that restraint, too, was brand new. Over at the bar, Lawrence was standing up. That does not sound like anything. You have to know Lawrence to know that it is everything. Lawrence does not stand at bars. Lawrence sits at the best table and lets the room come to him. But there he was, on his feet, a whiskey in his hand that I would have bet money was his second, and he was staring at a single sheet of paper somebody had handed him at the door. It was the press release. Clara's team had distributed it at registration, the way you do, and it named her new executive leadership. And 3 of those names, I learned this later, from someone who was standing closer, 3 of those names were people Lawrence had spent the better part of a year quietly courting for board seats at his own firm. He read the sheet. Then he read it again. I watched his mouth move, just once, around a word he did not say to anyone. From across the room I could not hear it, but I have replayed it enough times to be sure of the shape. 3, he said. 3. And then he drank the second whiskey standing up, which is the closest thing to a scream that a man like Lawrence Thorne will ever permit himself in public. He had a plan, Lawrence. His whole plan ran through me, through my leverage, my standing, my willingness to contest a settlement and tie up her transfer. His plan assumed that Clara was a thing that happened to me, a variable he could manage by managing me. And he was standing at a bar watching her assemble, in 11 days, a leadership team out of the exact people he had been trying to buy for a year. She was not a variable he was managing. She had never once been on his side of the board. And then there was Matthew. Matthew was on the far side of the room, near the windows, and he saw me. I know he saw me because he did the thing you do when you have seen someone and are deciding whether to have seen them. He held very still. He had a drink in his hands, both hands, wrapped around the glass like it was cold out, like he needed it for the warmth, though the room was warm and the drink was surely not. He did not come over. We stood on opposite sides of a loud, bright room, 12 years of friendship between us, and 40 feet of catering staff in the gap. He held his glass with both hands and told himself, I am certain some version of Lawrence is trying to help. And for all of it, across a whole, long, loud evening, he did not once walk across that floor to me. His denial had a shape that night, and the shape was the distance he kept. I did not go to him either. I want to be fair about that. Neither of us crossed the room. But I had a gray lanyard and a good reason. Matthew had Navy, and a best man toast about loyalty somewhere in his past, and no reason at all except the one he could not say out loud. I left before the dinner service. There was no version of the seated dinner where a gray lanyard did not end up at a table by the kitchen doors, and I had absorbed enough honest documents for one evening. In the parking structure, a different one, a nicer one, though by now parking structures and I had a whole relationship, I got into my car and found the vendor badge still looped around my neck. I took it off. I held it for a second in the pale light from the dashboard, this small gray verdict on a cheap woven cord. I did not throw it away. I have thought a lot about why. The cleanest thing, the movie thing, would have been to drop it in the trash on the way out, chin up, a man refusing his own demotion. I did not do the clean thing. I folded the lanyard once and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket, the same pocket where a better prepared man might have kept a pen. I think I kept it because it was true, and almost nothing else in my life that week had been. Gray, vendor, this is where you are. You keep the one document that is not lying to you. I sat in that car for a while before I started it, doing an inventory the way I do with a distressed asset, cold, line by line, no mercy. 6 months earlier, I had walked into that same gala through the front, navy lanyard, a table in the middle, a wife at home I no longer talked to. Now I had gray polyester folded in my jacket, no wife, and a company on a ventilator. And the strange thing, the thing I could not have explained to a single soul, was that I felt more like myself in the gray than I ever had in the navy. The navy had really been Lawrence's color all along. The gray, at least, was mine. Across the city, in a building Adam Sterling had never once been inside, Clara Caldwell sat at a wide, clean desk with a stack of assessment folders and worked. She did not work the way people imagined power working. There was no view-gazing, no long, meaningful pauses. She read, she initialed, she moved the top folder to the bottom of a different stack and started the next one. And the room was very quiet, and this was what the empire actually looked like from the inside. A woman reading carefully and deciding quickly. Her assistant came in with one more folder and set it at her elbow. The infrastructure assessments you asked for. Clara opened it. She read the summary page the way she read everything, top to bottom, once. The heading at the top of the page said Sterling Development, Infrastructure Phase 3. She did not linger on the name. Her face did not do anything at all. She initialed the corner. She held the folder out without looking up. Route it through the subsidiary, she said. Standard terms. Yes, Ms. Caldwell. The assistant took the folder and left, and the door closed with a soft click, and Clara Caldwell was already reading the next file. She did not call anyone. She did not mention it to anyone. She had made a sound decision about a sound investment. The fact that the name at the top of the page belonged to the man she had signed away 11 days ago changed exactly nothing about the math. That was the entire and terrible point of her. The same evening, in a very different office, Lawrence Thorne was also working, though his work had a different flavor to it now. The flavor of a man patching a wall he will not admit is cracked. He had his communications consultant on the other side of the desk, a sharp, quiet woman with a notepad, and he was describing what he wanted with the calm precision of someone who has done this many times. I want a feature, Lawrence said, a real one, positioning me as the originator of the market approach everyone is suddenly so excited about. The mixed-use repositioning model. The infrastructure play. All of it. He listed the concepts. Every one of them was mine, though he did not say my name, and she did not ask. How direct do you want the credit line? The consultant asked. Not direct at all. I want it to read as context, not credit claiming. He said this without a flicker, describing credit claiming so precisely that it could have been a definition in a textbook. The industry will understand what it means. That's the whole art of it. You don't take the thing. You stand where the thing already is, long enough, and people forget you weren't always standing there. She wrote it down. We can have a draft in 72 hours. 48, Lawrence said, not as a request, and without so much as glancing up from the next thing already waiting on his desk. The consultant did not blink at 48. It'll cost more, move that fast, she said. And it may read a little hungry, this soon after the Caldwell announcement. People could connect the two. Lawrence considered that for exactly 1 second. Move it anyway, he said. I don't need it to look relaxed. I need it out before the story hardens around her. He did not know, because how could he, that he was dictating an exhibit. That somewhere in a quiet firm downtown, a woman in a gray blazer had been collecting his patterns for over a year, and that this instinct of his, to respond to a loss by generating a flattering record of himself, was not a strength at all. It was the rope. He had been paying, for 30 years, to have his own rope professionally spun and beautifully placed, and he had never once needed it until now. Good, Lawrence said, and looked at his watch, and closed the meeting, because he had another call to make. He always had another call to make. That, too, would eventually be in the record. Part 5. It took the firm 11 days to grant me a meeting, and when the response finally came, it was not with Clara, and it was not with a junior associate. It was with her. The woman in the gray blazer. The one who had crossed the lobby and filed me in half a second and never said her name. Her name, it turned out, was Amy Liu, and her office was on a high floor with a view she never once looked at while I was in the room. Mr. Sterling. She did not stand. She gestured at the chair across from her. There was a legal pad open in front of her, and a pen resting on it, and nothing else on the desk at all. You asked for this meeting. Go ahead. That was the whole invitation. No coffee offered, though I had brought my own from the cart downstairs, a large one I had bought mostly to have something to hold. No small talk. No, how are you holding up? Just, go ahead. So I went ahead, and this is the part of the entire story I would most give a great deal to climb back into and do over. I talked. God, I talked. I gave her the context, all of it. The marriage, the years, the filing, the things I had not known, the timeline as I understood it, the questions I had assembled like a man building a case. I explained myself. I explained Clara to her own attorney. I described a marriage to the one person alive who had watched it from the outside for 5 years and needed no description from me. Amy listened without any expression at all. She made 2 small notes, early on, and then she set the pen down flat and stopped writing entirely. She let me fill the silence, and I filled it, because filling silences with competent-sounding words was the one skill I still trusted, and it was, in that room, precisely the wrong skill. Every so often she would say a single word. When? Or, go on. And I would move through it like a door opening, and it would turn out to be a wall she had painted to look like a door. She was not gathering information. She had all the information already. She was measuring what a man does with an open floor. And what I did with an open floor was explain myself, at length, to a woman who had watched me fail Clara across 5 years of family dinners while I checked my phone under the table. When I finally ran out of context, she looked at me for a moment. Then she closed the legal pad. Just closed it, quietly, and set the pen on top of it. And I understood, a beat too late, always a beat too late, that the meeting I thought I was running had in fact been a test, and that I had just spent 9 minutes failing it out loud. She opened a drawer. She took out a single sheet of paper. She placed it on the desk facing me, turned it with 2 fingers so I could read it, and tapped it once. Read the dates, she said. It was 1 page. A plain, printed page, the kind any office printer makes. 2 entries on it. 2 dates, each one circled in red ink, and a single red line drawn between them. The first was the date and time I had filed for divorce. My filing. The morning I slept 9 hours and felt so resolved. The second was the trigger. The moment the inheritance clause in Robert Caldwell's estate had activated and passed the whole thing to Clara. The clause that excluded a spouse in the event of a divorce filed by that spouse. The second date was 18 minutes after the first. I read it once. I read it again. I want to tell you I understood it slowly, that it dawned, that there was some merciful delay. There was not. It went in like a nail. 18 minutes. My filing did not happen to coincide with her inheritance. My filing was the key that turned the lock. I had not been surprised by the timing. I had been the timing. There is a particular kind of vertigo in learning that your one brave, decisive act was a formality, that the door you kicked open so proudly had already been unlocked from the other side, 18 months before, and your kick only completed a motion someone else had set into the wood and walked away from. I thought I had filed for my freedom. What I had actually filed, in my own steady hand, on a dead man's schedule, was her release. I have signed a great many consequential documents in my life. Loan papers, deeds, a marriage license once, in a courthouse not so different from the one where all of this began. And I had always believed, without ever examining the belief, that the person holding the pen is the person making the decision. That is the entire quiet faith of a man like me, that agency lives in the signature. Amy's single page took that faith apart in 18 minutes of ink. I had held the pen. I had decided nothing. I had completed something, for someone else, precisely on her schedule, and mistaken the completing for a choice. I did not drink my coffee. I want that noted, because I was holding it the entire time, a full paper cup going cold in my hand, and it never once occurred to me to drink from it. Some part of me had frozen around the exact posture I was in when the page landed. She knew, I said. My voice did not sound like mine. Amy did not nod. She did not soften. She let you choose, she said. Let. Not made you, not tricked you, not allowed. Let. As in, she knew the clause existed. She knew what her grandfather was dying of. She knew what my filing would do the instant the ink was dry, and she set her hands in her lap and did not stop me. She simply let me walk, on my own 2 feet, straight through a door I was so enormously proud of having opened myself. I sat with that. To my very small credit, I did not do the thing I had done for 9 straight minutes. I did not fill the silence. I did not explain, did not bargain, did not perform a single ounce of the composure I no longer had. I just held my cold coffee and let the page be true. Amy watched me not fill the silence. Something in her face shifted by a millimeter. Not warmth. I would not insult her by calling it warmth. But perhaps the small, professional acknowledgement of a man taking a hit without flinching sideways onto someone else. You had 5 years, she said. Quiet. Not cruel. Just accurate. You're asking me this now. There was no answer to that. There is still no answer to that. She was not asking a question. She was closing a file. She picked up the page, slid it back into its drawer, and stood. I'll show you out. She did not wait for me to rise first. She was already moving toward the door, and I got up and followed, still holding the coffee, because apparently the one thing I would not lose control of that afternoon was a $4 cup I had no intention of drinking. In the hallway, waiting for the elevator, I looked down at it in my hand. Full, cold, perfectly intact. I had carried an untouched coffee through the single most important conversation of my adult life and not spilled a drop of it. It was, I thought, the only thing I had managed to keep hold of in weeks, and it was a coffee. I did not go home. I got in my car, and I drove to Lawrence's office, because there was exactly one thing left in the whole mess that was still mine to decide, and I had just, in a high room with a view I never looked at, finally understood what it was. Here is what I understood, sitting at a red light with a cold coffee in the cup holder. The pause Lawrence kept selling me, the leverage, the window, the standing, all of it did one real thing. It would freeze Clara's transfer stone cold while expensive lawyers argued about it for a quarter, maybe longer. It would reach into the one clean thing left standing in this entire story, the thing she had built without hurting a single person, and it would put a hand around its throat and squeeze. For leverage, for men like Lawrence. And I would have been the hand. My name on the filing, my grief as the cover story. I had already been used once as an instrument I did not understand. That was the whole lesson of the page in Amy's drawer. I was not going to volunteer to be one a second time, with my eyes open, for a man who ordered the salmon. Lawrence was ready for me. Lawrence is always ready. He had documents fanned on his desk, and a legal pad of his own, and the warm, organized energy of a man mid-motion toward a thing he wants. Adam, good, sit. I've been reviewing the timeline, and I think the filing window... I'm withdrawing the motion, I said. The room went quiet. He blinked. Adam, I'm not doing it. I did not raise my voice. There was nothing to raise it about. I'm not contesting the settlement. I came to tell you in person. 3 seconds. I counted them, because I have never in 11 years seen Lawrence Thorne need 3 seconds. He is a man who always has the next sentence loaded before you finish yours. But he needed 3 seconds, and I watched him spend them, and it was, God help me, the best I had felt in weeks. Of course, he said, and the warmth slid back over his face like water finding its level. Of course, we'll find another approach. We. There was no we, but I let it go. I stood, and I put out my hand, and Lawrence shook it. I have shaken Lawrence's hand perhaps 40 times. I know the exact temperature of it, the exact duration, the practiced return grip of a man who has decided to make you feel chosen. Today, the grip had one extra beat in it, one small held pressure at the end, a fraction too long, the grip of a man keeping something off his face by routing it into his hand. I have felt that specific extra beat exactly twice in my career. Once, years ago, from a man about to deny me a partnership he had let me believe was coming. And now. It is a very small data set, but it is a very consistent one. I left. And I did not see it, but I would have bet the building again. Lawrence watched the door for 3 seconds after it closed, and then he picked up his phone. He called me twice that afternoon. I was back at my own desk, in my own small office, when the first call came. I let it go to voicemail. 40 minutes later, he called again, and this time I answered, because I wanted to hear something. Adam, listen, I've been thinking. Warm, immediate, already in motion. The settlement window isn't the only path here. There are other approaches. I've got a couple of ideas I think you'll want to hear. I hear you, I said. We don't have to rush anything, but the sooner we talk, the more options stay open. I'll keep that in mind. A pause. You know where I am. Of course I do, Lawrence said warmly, and rang off, and I sat there for a moment with the phone in my hand, turning one small fact over. He had called me 40 minutes after I withdrew, and he had already had the alternative ready. Not the beginnings of one, a whole alternative, packaged, waiting. You do not build a new plan in 40 minutes, not a good one. You reach for the plan you already had underneath the first one. For 11 years, I had taken Lawrence's plans the way you take weather, things that simply arrived, fully formed, because Lawrence was clever, and that was what clever produced. It had genuinely never once occurred to me that a plan arriving fully formed 40 minutes after your decision is not cleverness at all. It is a plan that was already written, folded, waiting behind the first one, for the exact contingency of you saying no. Lawrence had a plan for my yes, and a separate plan for my no. And that was the whole tell, right there, if I had ever been sober enough to read it. A mentor keeps a plan for your yes. Only a handler keeps one ready for your no. I took out a notepad. I wrote 3 lines. Called twice, 40 minutes apart, already had it ready. I underlined the last one. Then I did the only smart thing I did all week. Nothing. I did not call anyone. I did not accuse anyone. I did not go to the press, or to Clara, or to a lawyer. I folded the notepad into my desk drawer and closed it, and I opened my laptop to my own project files, because I still, barely, had a business to save. I was not investigating. I want to be clear about the difference, because it mattered later. I was not building a case. I was just, finally, after 11 years, noticing. Noticing is free. Noticing you can do with the drawer shut. And the thing about a man who has spent his whole career reading undervalued assets, spotting the worth that everyone else has walked past, is that the skill does not care what you point it at. For 20 years, I had aimed it at buildings. I had never once, not for a single afternoon, aimed it at the people standing closest to me. It was working beautifully now. It had simply arrived, as these things do with me, about a decade too late to be of any use to the marriage it should have saved. What I did not see, because I was staring at my own financials, was the other call Lawrence made that afternoon. Not to me, to Matthew. He's out, Lawrence said, no greeting. He withdrew the motion, so we move on the other track. Are you sure? Matthew's voice on the far end was careful. Adam is, he's not stupid, Lawrence. If this comes back around, do it through the standard channel. A conflict of interest flag on his financing approval. Clean. Ordinary. Nobody looks twice at a conflict flag. A beat. It buys the quarter. That's all we need. I don't, Matthew started and stopped. Matthew. There was a silence on the line then. A long one. The kind a man fills with all the reasons he is about to say yes and none of the reasons he should say no. Yes, Matthew said finally. Just that. One word, and it cost him every letter of it. And somewhere across town, a 72-hour clock started ticking on the last floor my old life was still standing on. Part 6. The thing that ended my quarter did not look like a weapon. It looked like paperwork, which is what the most dangerous weapons in my industry always look like. In an office across town, Lawrence's assistant set a single document in front of him, and Lawrence read it once, the way he reads everything, top to bottom, unhurried. Then he uncapped his pen and signed it. The same signature he uses for lunch reservations and holiday cards and 30 years of deals. No flourish, no hesitation. The signature of a man who has never once had to worry about his own handwriting being read back to him. Standard channel, he said, and handed it back, and his assistant carried it away, and that was the entire act. 20 seconds. A conflict of interest flag, filed on my project financing, through the most ordinary door in the building. He did not gloat. He did not even frown. To Lawrence, it was not cruelty. It was Tuesday. That is the thing I understand now about how real damage gets done at that altitude. It is never dramatic. Nobody shouts, nobody signs in blood. A man reads a page and signs it the way he signs everything, and hands it back to an assistant, and somewhere across a city 100 people's paychecks wobble, and he is already thinking about lunch. The ordinariness is not a disguise for the violence. The ordinariness is the violence. I found out the way you find out about weather that is already hit, after it was raining on me. My CFO called a little after 10. I could tell from the first syllable it was bad, because good news does not start with, "So, I need to flag something." "Go ahead," I said. "The financing approval on Phase 3. It's been flagged for a conflict of interest review. We're on hold." "What kind of hold?" "Indefinite. Pending review." A pause. The kind people leave when they are deciding how much to tell you. The flag came in as a senior filing out of Crane Capital. Crane Capital, Lawrence's shop. I kept my voice flat and even, which took more out of me than I expected. "How long ago was it filed?" I heard him click through to check. 72 hours ago." 72 hours. I sat with that number for a second. I had walked out of Lawrence's office, hands still warm from that one extra beat in his grip, 73 hours ago. He had signed the thing that would strangle my quarter roughly 60 minutes after I told him no. I did not say any of that. What I said, in my head, was one word. The word I had been using all week in place of several I could not say out loud in professional settings. Interesting. I was building a whole private glossary that week, and interesting was doing an enormous amount of the heavy lifting in it. "I'll call you back," I told him. "Wait, one more thing, and this part's actually good." He sounded almost apologetic to be delivering good news in the same breath. "A separate approval landed this morning. Third-party institutional fund. It covers the same tranche, so you're not dead in the water. You've got an option." "Which fund?" "Doesn't give a lot of detail, just says infrastructure subsidiary. I'll forward the docs." "Fine," I said, and I meant nothing by it, and I hung up, and I did not think about the second thing at all, because a drowning man does not stop to admire the shape of the rope. He just notes, dimly, that there is one. I did not call Lawrence. I want that on the record, because every cell in my body wanted to. Instead, I opened my contact list, the real one, the deep one, 20 years of names, and I started at the top, and I began to call. Let me tell you what your own network actually sounds like on the afternoon you finally, and rather desperately, test it. The first name was a man I had done 3 deals with. It rang out. No voicemail even, just ringing, and ringing, and the specific silence of a phone being looked at and set back down. The second name called me back, which I took as a good sign for exactly as long as it took him to start talking. He was warm. He was so warm. He was thrilled to hear from me. Gosh, what a stretch I was having. He would love, absolutely love to find a way in on this. But the timing was just brutal right now. Everything tied up. You know how it is. Let's get coffee when things settle. Things were not going to settle. We both knew it. We said goodbye like 2 men agreeing never to have coffee. I have made that exact call myself, from the other side, more times than I would like to admit. The warm brush-off is a craft. You leave the door open so wide and so sunny that the other person walks out through it thanking you. I had taught that move to half the people who were now using it on me. There is a specific kind of justice in being killed with your own manners. The third name did not bother with warmth, and I will always be a little grateful to him for that, because he was the one who actually told me the truth. "Adam," he said, and there was a tiredness in it, almost an apology. "Look, Lawrence asked me to hold off on anything in your sector for now. So, there it was." "I understand," I said, and I did. I understood it all at once, the way you understand a magic trick the instant someone shows you the wire. I sat there holding a dead phone, and I let myself finally count the thing I had been not counting for 20 years. My sector. He had said my sector, as though the work I did existed in a territory that Lawrence could put a temporary fence around by making one phone call. And the horrible, clarifying truth was that he could. Because it had never really been my sector. It had been Lawrence's, and I had been operating in it on a lease I never knew I was signing, and now the landlord had decided not to renew. Half the names below that one, I realized, were the same. Relationships I had counted as mine were relationships Lawrence had introduced me into, vouched me into, kept warm on my behalf for reasons I had always flattered myself were mentorship. I stopped counting somewhere in the 20s. It was not that the number was large, it was that I could no longer tell which names were real. This is the part the movies get wrong. It did not feel like betray in that moment. It felt like a survey, like finally being handed the actual blueprint of a building I thought I had built, and seeing, in clean architect's ink, how much of it was load-bearing walls that belonged to someone else. I want to be precise about the feeling, because it was not the one you would expect. I did not feel robbed. A man cannot feel robbed of something he was only ever borrowing. What I felt was the specific vertigo of recalculation, of watching my own net worth, the humankind, drop in real time as each name on the list resolved from asset to liability to simply unknown. I had spent 20 years being very good at exactly one thing, knowing what things were actually worth. I had somehow never once run the numbers on my own life. That night, I did something I had not done since I was a very young man with nothing to my name. I sat down and I wrote out, by hand, a list of the people I was actually sure of. Not the ones who owed me, not the ones Lawrence had lent me. The ones who, if I called them at 2 in the morning, bleeding, would open the door. The list, when I finished it, had 4 names on it, and 2 of those were employees I was about to struggle to keep paying. I looked at that short list for a long time. It was, I told myself, at least an honest list, which put it one full length ahead of nearly everything else I still owned. I closed the laptop. I sat for a moment in a very quiet office. Then I opened it again, because self-pity is a luxury, and I had a payroll. I found the document my CFO had forwarded. The third-party approval. The lifeboat I had not asked for. I opened it and looked, for the first time, at the letterhead across the top. Caldwell Capital, Infrastructure Division. I stared at those 2 words for 3 full seconds. Caldwell. I did not let myself think the rest of it. I did not connect it to a woman, or a signature, or 18 minutes, or a banner 12 feet tall. I could not afford to, is the honest truth. If I had let myself understand what that letterhead meant, I would have had to do something about it, and there was nothing to do about it, and I had a company to keep alive by Friday. So I picked up the phone and called my CFO back. Use the Caldwell approval, I said. Move it forward. Today. You sure? You don't want to know more about the... Use it, I said. Move forward. I did not ask where it came from. That was the single most disciplined thing I have ever done, and it looked, from the outside, exactly like giving up. Then I picked up the coffee on my desk and drank it, and I genuinely could not tell you whether I had made it that morning or the morning before. It was cold, either way. By then, cold coffee and I were, like me and parking structures, in a whole committed relationship. The letter came 3 days later. It came in a box, a plain cardboard box, delivered to my apartment with a printed label and a single line from Clara's assistant taped to the top. Personal effects. That was all. Personal effects, in the same clean corporate font as everything else that reached me from her world now. I opened it looking for my charger. That is the truth, and I am not going to dress it up. I had lost a phone charger somewhere in the collapse of my life, and I thought it might be in there. And I was on my knees on the kitchen floor pulling out the pieces of a shared decade looking for a $9 cable. She had returned everything. My charger? Yes. A watch I thought I had lost 2 years ago. A paperback I had accused a hotel of stealing in a fight we had once had about nothing. Every object I had left in the margins of her life, packed and labeled and returned, the most organized thing Clara had ever done in my presence. That should have warned me. Organization, from Clara, had started to mean something. There was a photograph in there too, one I did not remember either of us keeping, the 2 of us at somebody's wedding years ago, both of us laughing at something just outside the frame. I do not know who took it. I do not know what we were laughing at. I turned it face down on the counter. I could handle the charger and the watch and the paperback. I could not, right then, handle physical evidence that the 2 of us had ever once found the same thing funny. The letter was near the bottom, folded once. My name on the outside in her handwriting, which I would have known anywhere, which I had seen on grocery lists and birthday cards, and once on divorce papers. I unfolded it, and I read it standing up at the kitchen counter, and I did not sit down, because some animal part of me understood that sitting down would make it final, and I was not ready for it to be final. I am not going to tell you what it said. I have never told anyone what it said. It is the one thing left in this entire story that is only mine, and I am going to keep it that way. I will tell you this much. It was dated 6 months before I filed. It was not angry. There was not a single accusation in it. It was a woman, quietly, carefully, trying to reach a man who had already left the room years earlier, and simply had not bothered to tell either of them. She wrote it, and she folded it, and she never sent it, because by the time she finished it, there was no longer anyone at my address to receive it. I read it from the top of the page to the bottom, and when I got to the end, my thumb came to rest on her signature, on the small, familiar shape of her name, and it stayed there. Behind me, the coffee machine, which I did not remember turning on, finished its cycle and beeped, twice, cheerfully, into the silence. Because that is what the world does. It keeps making coffee. It beeps. It does not stop for the exact moment a man finally understands what he threw away, standing in a kitchen, holding a page he was 6 months too late to answer. I did not cry. I want to be honest about that, because it would be a better story if I had. I just stood there, for a long time, with my thumb on her name, in a kitchen that had been ours and was now only mine. Then I folded the letter along its one existing crease, and I put it in the kitchen drawer, under the takeout menus, where I would know exactly where it was and no one else would ever think to look. I poured the coffee I did not want, and I stood at the window with it, and I looked out at a city that had, in the space of a month, quietly rearranged itself to no longer have a place in it for me, and, for the first time, I did not reach for a single thing to say. Part 7. I watched it happen on a laptop, in my small office, eating a sandwich I had made myself because catering was one of the many things that had quietly left my life. I want you to picture that, because it matters. The whole thing finally turned, the entire long war of that year, and I was sitting in a rented room with mustard on my thumb. It was a press briefing, streamed the way these things are now, some industry event with a row of microphones and a bored crowd. Lawrence was there. Of course Lawrence was there. Lawrence attends everything. Being in the room is the entire basis of his power. He was in the second row, in a good suit, with the still and pleasant face of a man who has never lost control of a room in his life. Then, a reporter near the front stood up, and instead of a question, she held up her phone, and she said she had obtained an audio recording from what she described as an Caldwell Capital advisory session, 15 months ago, and she pressed play. Lawrence's voice came out of that little phone speaker and filled a silent briefing room, and it was, I have to be honest, exactly the voice. Calm, warm, unhurried. The advice-shaped cadence I had been hearing across a desk for 11 years. Whatever 12% of volume a phone speaker gives you, it did not matter. You could have identified that voice from the next building. I could not hear every word on the stream. I did not need to. There was one phrase that came through clean, in that reasonable, mentoring tone, the tone he used to tell me to separate the feeling from the deal. The marriage is already structurally weak, Lawrence's voice said. We build the timing around that. We build the timing around that. The briefing room understood it in 1 second. You could feel it land, 300 miles away, through a laptop, with mustard on my thumb. Everyone in that room knew who Lawrence was. Everyone in that room knew who I was, and who Clara was, and what marriage had recently, publicly, structurally failed. The math did itself. And here's the thing I will remember longest. Lawrence did not move. He did not stand up. He did not walk out. He could not walk out. Walking out of a room where your own voice is playing is a confession with legs, and Lawrence has never in his life confessed to anything. So he sat in the second row with his pleasant, still face, and he let his own voice finish talking about the timing of my divorce, and he did not so much as recross his legs. I had spent 11 years admiring exactly that composure, the way nothing touched him, the way he was always the calmest surface in any room. I watched it hold, flawless, total, while it did him absolutely no good at all. And I understood for the first time that Lawrence's famous composure had never been strength. It was just the last thing left standing after he had traded everything else away for advantage. It was a beautiful, empty room. Envisioned, him through a glass wall, you could see his people, his PR team, 4 of them, all on phones at once, mouths moving, a little scramble of motion behind the glass. And Lawrence sitting perfectly still in front of it. That was the whole picture. The stillness in the front and the panic behind the glass, and the glass letting the whole room see both at once. And there was one more thing buried in that clip, underneath the phrase everyone would spend the week repeating, that I think only I really heard. Lawrence had not been talking about a marriage in the abstract. He had been talking about mine, 15 months ago, as a structural weakness to build a timeline around, which meant that back when I still had a wife, and a pipeline, and the settled certainty that I was the one making the decisions in my own life, I had already been an entry in someone else's plan. I did not learn my marriage was in trouble from Clara, or from a counselor, or from any honest look in a mirror. I learned it from a leaked recording of the man who had been quietly counting on it. When the clip ended, the reporter asked for comment, and Lawrence's PR lead stepped to a microphone and said the recording was taken from a longer context and does not reflect. And the reporter had already moved to her next question. That is how you know a thing is over, by the way. Not when someone attacks it, when they stop letting you finish the sentence defending it. I closed the laptop. I did not call Amy. I want that noted, because I could have. Some part of me wanted to call her and say, "Did you do this? And thank you. And how long have you had that?" I did not call. Whatever was happening on a schedule that was not mine and had never been mine, and the single most useful thing I had learned all month was how to keep my hands off a process that was working without me. I made a fresh coffee instead, and I even drank it while it was still warm, which that particular month counted in my life as a genuine and hard-won small victory. I sat with a closed laptop for a while, and I waited to see if any of what I was feeling was going to turn into triumph, because I thought I was owed a little triumph. None of it did. What I mostly felt, watching the man who had spent 11 years managing me get quietly unmade by the sound of his own reasonable voice, was a strange level sadness, and underneath it, the oldest and dumbest thought a person is capable of having. I wish I had seen it sooner. Not even to stop it, just to not have been such a willing part of it. I was not there for the next part. I put it together later, from Matthew himself, in the one and only conversation the two of us would ever have about any of it. But I know how it went, and you should see it, because it is the moment the last piece of my old life quietly filed itself away. After the clip went public, Matthew called his lawyer. I can hear it. Matthew does not ask a simple question in his life. "I need to know what my exposure is on this," he would have said. And the lawyer would have asked 3 plain questions. Were you party to it? Did you sign anything? Is there a document? And Matthew would have answered all 3 with paragraphs. Escape hatches built into every sentence. The specific silence a lawyer gives you after you have taken 3 simple questions and made them, through sheer over-explanation, considerably more complicated than they needed to be. "Go in," the lawyer told him finally. "Don't say anything we haven't discussed." So Matthew went to Amy's firm, and this time, this is the detail that tells you everything. This time they did not leave him in the lobby. This time, they showed him straight in. He told me later that the being shown in was the exact moment he knew. For weeks, the wall had been the thing that made him anxious. The polite lobby, the folder of official channels, the 72-hour window that had turned me away too. He had spent those long weeks resenting that wall, exactly the way I once had, from the wrong side of it. And then, one afternoon, the wall simply opened for him, warm and immediate, and somewhere in the elevator up, he understood that a wall only opens for you like that once it is completely finished with you. When the wall stops keeping you out, it is not because you have earned the room, it is because they no longer need the wall. Amy was at her desk, and on the desk already, facing him, turned so he could read it the way she had turned a page for me, was a document. Blue ink, a signature at the bottom in handwriting Matthew had known for 12 years, because it was his own. The consulting agreement, the one between Matthew and Lawrence. Revenue share in exchange for access to my pipeline and reports on my state of mind. Our arrangement. It had been sitting in Lawrence's own tidy files, drafted through standard legal channels, because Lawrence files everything, and Amy's firm had obtained it the ordinary, legal, devastating way. Matthew saw it before Amy said a word. She let him see it. 3 full seconds of silence, the paper facing him, his own name at the bottom, and then she spoke. "We already have it." Matthew started. I know why you came. Not unkind. Amy is never unkind. She is just accurate, the same way she had been accurate with me. We don't need you. A beat. But I'll note that you came in. And she closed the folder. That was the whole thing. Matthew had walked in believing he could trade information for mercy, believing he had a card, believing there was a negotiation to have. And the negotiation had ended weeks before he arrived, in a filing cabinet, with his own signature. There is no version of the story where Matthew drifted. A man does not drift into blue ink. He signs it, on a specific day, with a specific pen, for a specific number. And yet, this surprised me. Hearing it from him much later, I did not hate him. I had fully expected to. What I felt instead was a flat, tired recognition. One man looking at another who had made a slightly worse version of the same mistake he had made. Matthew checked out of a 12-year friendship for money. I had checked out of a 5-year marriage for nothing at all, for pride, for a wall I built myself. I was in no real condition to be throwing stones about who had abandoned whom. That is the thing nobody warns you about. In the middle of being wronged, you keep waiting for the clean, bright feeling of being the injured party, the righteous one, and it never quite arrives, because you know your own ledger far too well. Matthew sold me. Lawrence used me. And I had spent 5 years treating a good woman like a reliable appliance in the corner of a room. We were not, any of us, the heroes of this story. We were just 3 men who had each, in his own private way, decided that a particular person was a thing you could safely stop paying attention to. Matthew left the firm and stood on the sidewalk for a while, I am told. He did not call Lawrence. He put his phone in his pocket, and he started walking. And I do not know where he walked to, and neither, I think, did he. And Lawrence, that same stretch of days, was making his last move, alone, at his own desk. He had decided the clip was a problem he could manage by managing the story, because that is the only tool Lawrence has ever really trusted. But first, he tried a bridge. He sent an offer to Clara, through an intermediary, quiet and deniable. An acquisition of one small Caldwell subsidiary, a nothing division, positioned as a peace offering and, more than that, as a test. He wanted, in the end, to find out whether there was still a single door left anywhere with his name on it. The answer came back on Amy's letterhead, carried in by his assistant, and Lawrence opened it at his desk. 2 sentences. Caldwell Capital is not currently pursuing divestitures. Thank you for your interest. It was signed by Amy Lou, not by Clara. Clara's name did not appear anywhere on it, because Amy was already keeping Clara's name off of every piece of paper that might one day be read aloud in a proceeding. Lawrence read it once, top to bottom. He is a fast reader, always has been. 2 short sentences did not take a man like him any time at all. Then he opened the top drawer of his desk, and he set the letter inside it, and he closed the drawer. And this is the part I find I cannot stop thinking about. His hand stayed on the drawer handle for 1 beat too long. Just one. A man alone in an office, with no one watching, no audience to perform composure for, and his hand rested on a closed drawer for 1 extra second before he made it let go. I have thought about that 1 extra second more than almost anything else in the whole affair, because I know that second. I sat on the hood of a car once and could not make my legs work. Everyone in this story got their 1 second, the one where the surface finally admits what the body has known for a while. Mine came in a parking garage with a phone in my hand. Lawrence's came alone, in a locked office, with his hand on a drawer and no one to perform for, and that is somehow the loneliest version of it I can picture. A man so committed to composure that even his own collapse had to happen in private, to an audience of 1 desk. He did not shred the letter. He did not throw it away. He filed it, the way you file a thing you cannot stop thinking about, in the 1 drawer he kept closest to his own hands. He was, without any idea that he was doing it, building the exhibit. Every instinct that had made Lawrence powerful, keep the records, keep the receipts, keep everything close and quiet and controlled, was now, 1 closed drawer at a time, assembling the case against him in his own furniture. Then he took his hand off the handle. He picked up his phone. He had 3 journalists to call, to explain about context, to get ahead of the story, to do the one thing he had always been able to do, which was talk. He did not know, how could he, that one of the 3 would listen politely, and take careful notes, and then publish the entire transcript of the call. That his effort to bury the recording would become, within the week, a second and larger story, all in his own careful, reasonable, unmistakable voice. He was still, at that point, a man who believed the problem was that people had not yet heard enough from him. Part 8. The end of Lawrence Thorne was broadcast, like everything else in my life that year, and I watched it the same way I had watched all of it, on a laptop, in my small office, alone, with a coffee I had made myself. It was the Caldwell Capital board session, opened to the press this time, and streamed live to anyone, anywhere who cared to watch it happen. There was a long, polished table and a big screen at the front of the room, and there was Clara at the head of it, and there was Lawrence, 3 seats down, in the good suit, with the still pleasant face. Clara chaired it in 3 sentences. I counted them. because I had learned by then that Clara does everything in the fewest possible words, and that the fewer the words, the more the weight. "The board is called to session," she said. "There is one motion before us. I'll ask Ms. Liu to present the resolution materials." That was all. Then she sat back, and she did not look at Lawrence. Not once, the entire time. I watched for it. Not once, across the entire proceeding. She never gave him even the small dignity of being looked at. Amy stood, and she brought up the exhibit on the big screen, and here's the thing I want you to understand, because it is the whole genius of how it was done. She did not make a case. She did not give a speech. She did not once explain what any of it meant, or editorialize a single entry on it. She just put up a plain timeline. Entry after entry, each one a date and a document title. An advisory session, recorded 15 months ago. A financing block, filed, with its timestamp. A profile piece, commissioned, with its date. A consulting agreement, signed. An acquisition offer, made through an intermediary, and its 2-sentence rejection. Date, document. Date, document. Down the screen in clean, neutral type. And every single entry was something Lawrence had made. Signed, filed, commissioned. Recorded in a room he chose to speak in. Amy did not have to connect them. You cannot argue with a calendar. The dates simply sat there next to each other and told the whole story in a language that has no adjectives and takes no sides. At one point, Amy played the recording. Not the clip this time, the whole thing. The full advisory session, 15 months old. Lawrence's warm, reasonable voice filling that boardroom the way it had once filled every room he ever walked into. And Lawrence sat and listened to a 15-month younger Lawrence calmly lay out the plan to build a timeline around a weak marriage. His face did the only thing it knew how to do, which was nothing. He listened to himself the way you would listen to a weather report for a city you no longer live in. I do not know how a man survives sitting through that. I have come to suspect the answer is that a part of him does not. That is the trap he never saw, and it is worth saying plainly, because it is the moral of the entire thing. Lawrence spent 30 years being careful, keeping the records, keeping the receipts, filing everything, quietly, through standard channels, because standard channels were clean, and a man who stays inside them is a man who can never be caught out. He was right about that for 30 years. He was only wrong about one thing. He assumed his own records would only ever be read by people who worked for him. I had built my whole career on a close cousin of that same assumption, if I am honest about it, that the story gets told by the person with the most power in the room. That if you are careful enough, and senior enough, and calm enough, you get to be the one who decides what the record finally says. Clara's grandfather, dying, had understood something that Lawrence and I both spent our whole lives missing. The record is not written by the powerful. It is written by whoever is still standing there, patient and unhurried, on the day the powerful finally overreach. He had spent his last 18 months making very sure that whoever that turned out to be, it was never going to be Lawrence Thorne. The vote was called. It went around the table. I could not hear most of the individual votes on the stream, just the small motions of hands and heads, and then the tally came up on the screen at the front of the room, in the same clean, neutral type as the exhibit. 8-1. 8 in favor of the resolution, 1 against. You did not need the stream to tell you whose one vote it was. Every person in that room knew. Lawrence Thorne had voted against his own removal, the single dissenting vote in the room, the one hand raised for the defense of Lawrence Thorne belonging to Lawrence Thorne. He was, at the very end, exactly as alone as the tally said he was, and he had cast the only vote that said otherwise, and it changed nothing, because a man is not a quorum. And nobody looked at him. That was the part that landed hardest, watching it. Not gloating, not triumph. In a room of people who had deferred to that man for decades, when the number came up on the screen, not one of them turned their head toward him. They looked at the screen, or at their papers, or at Clara. He had become, in the space of one tally, a thing you do not look directly at. "The motion carries," Clara said. 2 words. She closed the session. She still did not look at him. I closed the laptop. I want to tell you I felt something enormous. I had earned something enormous, surely, some flood of vindication after the month I had had. But I sat there in front of a black screen, and what I felt was quiet, and level, and almost embarrassingly small. The man who had run my life from the 3rd row for 11 years had just been removed from a board by the weight of his own paperwork, and I had contributed to it precisely nothing except the good sense once to say no. None of it had been mine. I need to keep saying that, because it is the strange, true shape of the whole thing, and it is what makes it something other than the revenge I might once have wanted. I did not build the exhibit. I did not leak the clip. I did not find the timestamp. A dying man I had barely bothered to speak to had set all of it in motion 18 months before I ever filed a single page. A woman in a gray blazer had kept the clock wound. My ex-wife had simply, quietly, declined to stop any of it. I was not the hero of my own ruin, and I was not the hero of my own deliverance either. I was the man both of them happened around, and I was, very slowly, learning how to be all right with that. So I did the only thing I had reliably done all month. I got up, and I made a fresh pot of coffee. I have made coffee during every single major event of the collapse and recovery of my own life. The signing, the garage, the gala, the letter, the vote. At a certain point, I began to suspect that making coffee was, honestly, my primary contribution to the resolution of my own story. Other people had built the case, kept the records, held the proof, chaired the room. I had mostly kept the pot warm. I am aware that this is not entirely an unfair assessment. I made the coffee, I drank it. It was, that day, hot. And I noticed that it was hot. And that felt like enough. The aftermath arrived the way aftermath does, in small formal envelopes, over the following days. Matthew got his that same afternoon, I later understood. His assistant brought it in, an official notice, brief, signed, on the letterhead of the board action. His consulting partnership was voided by the same resolution that removed Lawrence, named in the same exhibit, cited in the same clean, neutral type. Everything he had signed up for, gone in a single line, on the same page that ended the man he had signed up with. He read it. He sat with it a while. And then he did the thing I had been half waiting a month for. He opened his phone, and he wrote me a message. A long one. I know it was long because it took a while for it to arrive, and because when it did, it filled the whole screen and then some, everything, I imagine, that he had been not saying since a courthouse hallway a lifetime ago. The explanation, the context, the position he had been in, every escape hatch he had ever built, all at once, in one final structure of a message, sent to the one person it was addressed to and could no longer reach. I read it, all of it. I want to be honest that I read every word. And then I did not reply. I did not write back that I forgave him because I was not sure that I did, and I have a rule now about not saying things I have not verified. I did not write back that I was angry, because the anger had already burned down to that flat, tired recognition I told you about. I did not write back at all. The little receipts under his message ticked over to read, and stayed there, read and unanswered. And that was the entire reply. And I understood as I set the phone down that it was going to be the only reply he ever got. I have thought about whether that was cruel. I have decided it was not, though I understand it might look that way from the outside. Matthew did not need my forgiveness, and he did not need my anger. What he had wanted all those weeks was a conversation, the one where he explains, and I receive the explanation, and the explaining makes it lighter. I was simply never going to hand him that. The weight was his, and I was not going to help him carry that weight 1 inch by agreeing to turn it into a discussion. I scrolled to his name in my contacts. I did not delete it. I want that on the record too, because deleting it would have been a statement, and I was done making statements. I just let it sit where it had drifted, near the bottom of a long list, a name I would see occasionally and scroll past. That is where 12 years goes, when it goes. Not into a dramatic deletion, into the bottom of a list, intact, unused. I keep waiting, even now, to feel worse about that than I do. He was my best friend for 12 years. He gave a toast at my wedding that made 2 whole tables cry, and he meant it, I am fairly sure, on the day. The truth I have had to make my peace with is that both things are real at the same time. He meant the toast, and he signed the agreement, and a person can do both and still end up as just a name near the bottom of your phone. People are not one thing. That is the whole hard lesson of the year, and it cost me nearly everything I had to learn it. There was one more envelope, and it was mine, and it came by courier from Amy's firm. It was not a legal document. I could tell by the weight of it. Just a single folded page, on the firm's letterhead, formal and brief, confirming in 2 lines that the conflict of interest hold on my project financing had been released and the matter considered closed. No signature I recognized, no note, no mention of Clara or of Lawrence or of anything at all beyond the plain administrative fact that the thing squeezing my company had let go. I read it twice. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel rescued. I felt the specific, flat relief of a man who has been holding his breath for so long that the breathing itself feels strange. I folded the page along its crease, and I put it in my desk drawer, on top of a notepad that still said, "Already had it ready." I closed the drawer. Then I went back to my project file, because I had a company to keep alive, and now, quietly, without anyone anywhere saying so out loud, I was going to be able to. Lawrence, at that hour, was in his car. He was in the underground garage beneath the Caldwell building. A garage. Of course it was a garage. The same class of concrete room where he had first appeared at my shoulder with a handout and an offer of coffee. He had taken his jacket off and laid it on the passenger seat, and as he reached to move it to the back, something in the inside pocket caught the light. A business card. Mine. From some professional meeting months and a lifetime ago, back when I was a man Lawrence collected cards from. He took it out. He held it for a moment in the dim garage light, this small rectangle with my name on it, the name of the one instrument in 15 months of careful work that had, at the last, simply declined to be used. I have wondered since what he was thinking holding it, whether he was angry at me, or at himself, or at neither. I have decided that I do not get to know, and that this is correct, that a man is entitled to the privacy of his own worst moment, even a man like Lawrence, even in a garage, even after all of it. It is the one courtesy I can extend him that he never once extended me. I do not know what he felt. I only know that he kept the card. He did not tear it up. He did not drop it on the concrete. He put it back in the pocket, and he folded the jacket over the back seat, and he started the car. And then he sat there, engine running, not driving, for a moment, the exact posture, though he would never know it, that Matthew had sat in outside a courthouse the morning all of this began. A man in a running car, going nowhere, with something in his hand he could not use and could not quite throw away. Then he pulled out and drove up the ramp and left through a parking garage exit, which is a very ordinary way for the most dangerous man I ever knew to leave a story. And across the city, Matthew sat at his own desk with a drawer open a crack, the drawer with a single face-down photograph in it that he never once turned back over. He closed it. He opened his laptop, and he stared at a blank email with no address in the line and nothing in the body. After a while, he closed that too, and typed nothing, and sent nothing. And that, for Matthew, was the truest thing he did all year. Part 9. 6 months is enough time to build a small, ordinary life, if you are willing to build a small, ordinary one, which it turns out I finally was. I had a smaller office now, in a cheaper building, with a team of 4 instead of a team of 14, and a coffee machine I had bought myself and actually knew how to clean. The projects were smaller too, and I did them the hard, slow, unglamorous way, without a mentor smoothing the road ahead of me, because there was no longer anyone smoothing anything, and it turned out I could still do the work. That had been an open question for a while. It was good to have it closed. And on a Tuesday in the spring, 6 months after a courthouse and a parking garage, I went to close a deal. It was a real deal, a good one, financing and a partnership on the infrastructure project that had nearly died in the winter. The counterparty was in Caldwell subsidiary. I knew that going in. I had made my peace with it going in, or told myself I had, which is a different thing that sometimes gets you to the same place. The conference room was neutral and clean, glass and gray, the kind of room where nothing personal has ever happened or ever will. A representative from the subsidiary was already seated, and there, standing by the table, was not Amy herself. Amy had receded back into the structure she ran, the way she always did once a thing was handled. It was one of her assistants, with a folder and a pen and the particular unhurried calm of people who work for Amy Lou. "Mr. Sterling," she gestured at the chair, "whenever you're ready. The terms are as discussed." I sat. I want to tell you my hands were steady, and they were, because 6 months is also enough time to learn how to sit down at a table and sign your name without it meaning the end of the world. I had done a lot of that lately. I turned to the first page to review it, the way you do, and that was when I saw the letterhead. Caldwell Capital, Infrastructure Subsidiary. The same words I had stared at in a panic in the winter, on a lifeboat I did not ask about because I could not afford to. Except now I let myself read them. Now I had the room to understand what I had refused to understand back when understanding would have cost me too much. She had approved this project before Lawrence's block ever landed. The financing that saved my company in the winter had already been sitting there, pre-approved, through an Caldwell subsidiary, weeks before the man I trusted tried to strangle me with a conflict of interest flag. It had been waiting the whole time. And here's the part I made myself sit with. The distinction that is the entire difference between a sad story and a merely honest one. She did not do it to save me. I know that now with total certainty, because if she had done it to save me, she would have had to feel something, and Clara had made a decision months earlier to stop feeling things in my direction. She approved it because it was a sound investment. My project was good. She had read the assessment, seen that it would return, and initialed it, the way she initialed everything. Once, top to bottom, no sentiment. The fact that a sound investment happened to also keep me alive was incidental to her. Completely incidental. And I understand now that the incidentalness is not the cruel part. The incidentalness is the respect. She did not rescue her ex-husband. She made money on a good developer. Those are not the same transaction, and she made very sure, in the cleanest possible way, that I would always know which one it was. I turned to the signature page. Her signature was at the bottom of the counterpart. The same handwriting from the grocery lists and the birthday cards and the divorce papers, and one folded letter in a kitchen drawer under the takeout menus. And in the notes field, next to it, in that same hand, 3 words. Standard terms. No exceptions. I read them once. Standard terms, meaning, you get what any competent counterparty would get, no more, no less. No exceptions, meaning, not for you. Not for old times, not for 5 years, not for the man you used to be to me. There is no special clause here, no door propped open a careful inch, no line that means, come back. There is a good contract, offered to a good developer, on the same terms as anyone. That is all there is. That is all there is ever going to be. I want to describe to you what I felt, and I can, because I had 6 months of practice at feeling things accurately by then. I did not feel crushed. I did not feel hope either, which is the thing a lesser man, an earlier me, would have gone looking for in those 3 words. I felt the clean, flat weight of a door that is not slammed, and is not locked, and is simply, permanently, not left open. And I understood, sitting there with a pen in my hand, that a door not left open is more final than any door slammed in your face. A slam is an emotion. A slam is a thing you can argue with. This was not a slam. This was an answer. So I picked up the pen, and I signed. I did not pause first. I want that on the record, because 6 months earlier, I would have paused, would have let the moment be a moment, would have needed it to be about me. I just signed, in the same clean, professional register the whole back half of my life now ran in, and I set the pen down. We'll route the originals through the firm, Amy's assistant said. Thank you, I said, and I meant it, and it was not aimed at her, and she knew it was not aimed at her, and she let it go by without comment, which was its own small kindness. I stood. I shook the subsidiary representative's hand, a good, firm, correct handshake, warm exactly to the degree that closing a good deal warrants and not 1 degree past it. I picked up my jacket, which I realized I had carried in over my arm the whole time. And I noticed, with the last dry flicker of the voice that had narrated this whole ruinous year to me, that I had walked into the biggest meeting of my recent life with my jacket already on my arm and the pen already uncapped in my head. Like a man who had decided in advance that he was going to sign and had therefore left himself no scene to play, I had been prepared. That is not quite the same thing as being ready. But by that spring it was close enough, and close enough was the most honest thing I had to offer, and I had learned, finally, to stop demanding more than the honest thing. I walked out of the conference room, and I did not look back at the door, and the folder stayed on the table behind me. The hallway was cool. The lobby was cooler, that over-air-conditioned chill that good buildings use to tell you they can afford it, and after the warm, still conference room, it hit me like a small, clean shock. I stood in it for a second. And the only thought I had, the entire emotional content of the man walking out of the last room this story had for him, was that I preferred the lobby temperature. That was all. That was the whole inner voice, the one that had carried me through a garage and a gala and a kitchen, reduced at last to a mild preference about air conditioning. I have never been more relieved by a boring thought in my life. It meant I had come all the way back to myself. I walked out of the building into an ordinary afternoon. The city was doing what the city does. I walked to my car, a parking structure again, of course. The two of us would apparently be together forever. And I got in, and I drove back to my small office, and I did the rest of the day's work. There was one more room, later that spring, where the last thread quietly tied itself off. It was an industry conference, a dinner, the same species of event as the gala where I had worn a gray lanyard, though a different season and a different city, and, more to the point, a different man attending it. I had a real badge this time. I had earned my way back to a real badge the slow way, and it did not feel like triumph. It just felt like a badge. I was at a table, mid-conversation with a woman I had started doing good work with, a sharp developer 20 years into her own hard, slow climb. The chair to my left was taken by a colleague from the new, real, unglamorous network I had actually built myself over 6 months, one name at a time, none of them anyone's on loan. And across the room, at the bar, stood Matthew. He had a plate in his hand. He was eating standing up, at the edge of the room, the way you do when you do not have a seat at any particular table because you no longer have the relationships that reserve one. He was watching me. I knew he was watching me the way you always know. And I want to tell you exactly what I did, because it is the truest measure of how far the year had carried me. I did nothing. I did not glare across the room at him. I did not pointedly ignore him, which is its own kind of attention, its own message sent. I simply did not look. I was in a conversation, with a person I respected, in a chair between two people who had earned their chairs. Matthew was at the bar. The distance between that table and that bar was the entire remaining content of a 12-year friendship, and I let it be exactly that distance without doing a single thing to it. He watched me shake the hand of the woman I was talking to. Then, I am told, he set his plate down on the bar unfinished, and he took out his phone, and he found my name where it had drifted to the bottom of his contacts, and he looked at it for a while, and he did not call. And he put the phone back in his pocket, and he left before the dinner was served, and that, a man leaving a good room early, alone, with a name he would not dial, is the last the story has to say about Matthew Evans. There is no scene where we forgive each other. There was never going to be. The silence was the sentence, and he served it standing at a bar. I felt no triumph watching him go. I want to be clear about that, because a younger version of me would have wanted the triumph, would have felt owed it, would have stood up to collect it. What I felt instead was the same flat sadness I had felt watching Lawrence sit through his own recording. The recognition that people mostly are not punished by anyone at all. They are just, in the end, left standing exactly where their own choices set them down. Matthew put himself at that bar. Nobody sent him. He walked over on his own 2 feet, one signature at a time. I drove home that night to the small apartment, and I did the small, ordinary things a person does. In the morning, I went to my small, ordinary office, and I made coffee in the machine I knew how to clean, with a fresh filter I had put in myself. And that is where I will leave it. Not with the money, which came, not with the vindication, which also came, quietly, and mattered less than I had spent a year assuming it would. I will leave it with a man at a desk, in a rebuilt and unremarkable life, with his project files in order, and a hot cup of coffee he actually remembered making, no longer waiting for a phone to ring, no longer rehearsing a speech for anyone. The letter is still in the kitchen drawer, by the way, under the takeout menus. I have not read it again, and I am not going to. I know what it says. I know I was 6 months too late to answer it. Some things you do not keep in order to read them again. You keep them so that you never once get to pretend for the rest of your life that you did not know. Somewhere out there, Clara Caldwell is running an empire with a steady hand, and she is not thinking about me. And that is exactly as it should be. She gave me the last honest thing anyone gave me that year. 3 words on a contract. And the honest thing was this: the door is not open. It was open for years, and I stood in the hallway checking my phone. And now it is closed. Not slammed, not locked, just closed. And there is nothing on the other side of it for me, and there does not need to be. I signed the page. I did not ask for more. That, finally, was the one thing I got right.